I've spent my whole life building an empire. I've spent decades accumulating achievements, climbing the ladder, showing the entire world that I was someone. And you know the result of all that? My son visited me exactly once in 12 years. Once. 12 years. I'm 78 now, and I finally understand where I went wrong. But it took me so long to realize it, I almost missed my chance to fix it. And the worst part is, you're probably making the same mistakes I did, thinking you're doing everything right, that you're being a good father, a good mother, that you're giving your children the best. I thought that too. I was completely mistaken. When my son was 8, I worked until 11 every single night. Every weekend was for closing deals, holding meetings, building the future I thought I was securing for him. I remember one time he asked me to come to his soccer game at school. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I told him I couldn't, that I had an important meeting, that we'd talk when I got home. When I got home, he was already asleep. The next day, he didn't mention the game again. He never asked me to come to anything again. He was 9 years old, and he'd already given up on me. But I didn't notice. I kept working, kept building, kept believing I was doing the right thing. After all, I was paying for the best school, buying him everything he needed, making sure he wouldn't go through the hardships I'd faced. That was love, wasn't it? That was being a good father. I truly believed it. I worked so hard that when I looked again, he was 15 and barely spoke to me. I worked a little more, and he was 22 and living in another city. I kept working, and suddenly he was 35, married, with 2 kids I barely knew, and we spoke through text once a month. If that. Let me tell you about the day everything fell apart. I had just closed the biggest deal of my career. 66 years old, CEO of the company, finally at the top after 40 years of insane work. I was in the office celebrating with the team when I felt that pain in my chest. It wasn't just any pain. It was like someone was squeezing my heart with both hands. I fell to the floor, people screaming around me, ambulance, hospital, tubes, beeping machines, and that fear that I was going to die right there at that moment, and that it had all been for nothing. I spent a week in the hospital. My son came to visit me on the second day. He lives 250 miles away. He took a plane, came straight from the airport to the hospital. He walked into the room with his usual formal demeanor, gave me a quick hug, asked how I was. He stayed for 2 hours. We talked about superficial things. The weather was hot. Traffic in Chicago was impossible. How business was. He told me his oldest son had joined the school's basketball team. I didn't even know my grandson played basketball. I didn't even know. He left saying he'd be back on the weekend. He didn't come. Saturday morning, I got a text message. Something came up, Dad. Sorry. We'll talk next week. Something came up. I stared at that message, and for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question I should have asked decades ago. What the hell did I do to deserve this? And more importantly, what the hell did I fail to do? The doctors said I was lucky. The heart attack could have killed me. They said I needed to slow down, work less, take care of my health. Take care of my health. As if health were just the physical heart. No one told me to take care of the other kind of health, the one you don't see in tests. The health of relationships, the health of the soul, the one that had been destroyed for a long time, and I hadn't even realized it. I was on bed rest at home for 3 weeks. Alone. The housekeeper came in the morning, made food, cleaned, and left in the late afternoon. The silence in that house was deafening. I, who had always been so busy, always rushing, always with 1,000 things to do, suddenly had nothing. Nothing but time to think. And thinking hurts when you're 78 years old and you realize you've wasted your whole life. I know you're thinking of someone right now, a son, a daughter, maybe a grandchild, someone you feel is distant, who doesn't reach out to you as much as you'd like. And you're probably justifying it to yourself, saying it's modern life, that people are busy, that it's normal. I fooled myself like that for years, too. Tell me in the comments, do you also feel like you've lost connection with someone you love? Write this: I feel like I've lost connection with, and then fill in who it is. You don't have to explain the reasons if you don't want to, but when you put it into words, when you admit it, something starts to change within you, and maybe your comment will give someone else here the courage to acknowledge the same pain. So tell me, who have you lost connection with? It took me 6 months after that heart attack to finally find the courage to do what I should have done decades ago. I called my son and asked if we could have lunch. It wasn't easy to make that call. I called 3 times and hung up before he answered. The 4th time, I let it ring. He answered with that polite but distant voice. "Sure, Dad. What day works for you?" We scheduled it for a Saturday. He came alone. He didn't bring his wife, didn't bring his kids, just him. We met at a restaurant I used to frequent for business meetings. See the irony? Even for lunch with my son, I chose a workplace. He arrived on time as always, punctual, organized, well-dressed. He sat across from me and waited for me to start the conversation because that's how it had been my whole life. I always led everything. I always decided everything. I always spoke, and he always listened, or pretended to listen while giving up on me inside. I ordered the food. We talked about trivialities. The waiter brought the appetizers. My son ate in silence, and then I finally found the courage. Finally, at 76 years old, I found the courage to ask the question that was suffocating me. Why don't you ever visit? Why do we barely talk? Why, when I almost died, did you come once and then leave? He stopped eating, slowly placed his fork on his plate, looked at me with those eyes that are just like mine, but that carried a sadness I had never truly seen before, or maybe I had always seen it and pretended not to. He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started to speak, and every word that came out of his mouth was like a stab. He said that when he was a kid, he tried to have a father. He really tried. He told me how he'd stay up late waiting for me to get home from work, just to say good night. He'd save things to show me, drawings from school, good test scores, projects he'd completed. But when I got home, I was always too tired. Always had my mind elsewhere, always saying we'd talk on the weekend. Weekends that never arrived because I was working or too exhausted from working. He said that as a teenager, he still had hope. He still thought maybe one day I'd realize he existed, that maybe one day I'd leave work early and we'd do something together. Anything, watch a movie, play catch, just talk. But it never happened. I always had something more important. Always a meeting, a client, a problem to solve, always. And then he said the sentence I'll never forget for the rest of my life. He said that when he became an adult, he simply stopped trying because it hurt less to accept that I wasn't interested than to keep getting rejected. Rejected. My son spent his entire life feeling rejected by me, and I thought I was giving him everything, thought I was being a good father because I paid the bills, bought him what he needed, made sure he had opportunities I didn't. You know what hurt the most? It wasn't anger. He wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was indifference. He'd given up on me so long ago he didn't even feel anger anymore, just that quiet sadness of someone who's accepted things are the way they are and aren't going to change. He said he didn't blame me, said he understood I was doing the best I knew how, that I was raised in a different era, that I thought working for my kids was how you loved them. But then he said something that tore me apart. He said he'd decided to do things differently with his own kids, that he'd decided not to make the same mistake with them that I made with him. That's why he spent so much time with his children. That's why he never missed a game, a school play, a family dinner. That's why he left work at 6 o'clock every day, no exceptions, because he'd seen in me the perfect example of how not to be. I was the model of what to avoid, the reference point for failure. And you know what happened to me at that moment? I got mad. I got angry. How dare he say that? Me, who'd worked like a dog my whole life to give him everything. Me, who never let him go without anything. Me, who paid for the best school, the best college, gave him a car when he turned 18, helped with the down payment on his first apartment. How dare he? I stood up from the table and left, didn't even finish lunch, left him sitting there, and drove home with that anger burning in my chest. I spent a whole week replaying that conversation, stewing, feeling wronged, until one night, alone in that huge empty house, I looked around and realized he was absolutely right. There were photos of his graduations on the walls, all taken by his mother because I wasn't there. There were trophies he'd won in swim meets. I didn't even know he swam. There was a guitar leaning in a corner of the music room I'd turned into an office. I didn't even know he played guitar. I didn't know. I'd lived in the same house with him for 18 years and didn't know my son played guitar. There, at that moment, at 76 years old, it finally hit me. I hadn't been a good father. I'd been a provider. I'd been a bill payer. I'd been someone who made sure nothing material was lacking. But a father? Father is something else. Father is presence. Father is time. Father is attention. Father is being there when it matters and when it doesn't matter too. Father is truly knowing your child, not just knowing their name and birthday. I called him the next day. I apologized. It wasn't easy. Men of my generation weren't taught to apologize, let alone to our own sons. But I called and told him he was right, told him I'd messed up, told him I'd wasted the chance to truly know him, to truly be a part of his life. Said there was no excuse, no justification, that I'd simply failed. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you." Just that. Thank you. And you know what? It was more than I deserved, because I didn't even deserve that. Didn't deserve his grace, his patience, his willingness to even listen. After that phone call, something started to change. Slowly, very slowly, but it started. He began calling me once a week. Short conversations at first. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Then they got longer. Half an hour. An hour. He'd tell me about his work, about his kids. I listened, for real, for the first time in my life. Not listening while reading emails or thinking about work. Listening for real, asking questions, wanting to know. 6 months after that lunch, he invited me to a game of my grandson's. Basketball. Remember, I didn't even know my grandson played basketball. Yeah, he invited me. I went. Arrived early, sat in the stands, waited for the game to start. When my grandson ran onto the court and saw me there, he stopped, looked at his dad. My son nodded. The boy looked at me again, gave a small, shy smile, and went to warm up. The game started. I didn't understand basketball at all. Still don't. But I cheered and rooted like I did. Jumped when my grandson made a basket. Celebrated when his team won. And at the end, when he came over to talk to me, sweaty and smiling, and said, "Thanks for coming, Grandpa," something inside me broke. It broke and started to rebuild at the same time. I started going to all the games. Tuesdays and Thursdays, sometimes Saturdays too when there was a tournament. Me, who'd never been to one of my son's games, was there every week watching my grandson play. And you know what I realized? It wasn't about basketball. It was about presence. It was about being there. It was about the boy looking into the stands and seeing me. It was about him knowing I cared enough to be there. One day my grandson asked me if I'd gone to his dad's games when he was a kid. I didn't know what to say. My son, standing beside me, answered for me, said no. Grandpa worked a lot. It was a different time. But he looked at me when he said it, and in that look there was forgiveness. There was still pain, a lot of pain, but there was forgiveness too. I had a friend who passed away last year. His name was Robert. I met him about 15 years ago in a business networking group. We grabbed lunch together once a month. He was 79 when he died. A sudden heart attack. The funeral home was so packed, people were standing in the aisles. His 3 kids were there, completely devastated, crying like they'd lost their footing, and they had. In the last few years, whenever we met, Robert always talked about his kids, always. He'd tell me they had lunch together every Sunday. He'd tell me his grandkids slept over every Friday. He'd tell me they called him every day, sometimes just to check in, sometimes for advice, sometimes just to chat. I was always jealous of that. I always thought he was lucky, that his kids were different, better. One day, about 2 years before he passed, I finally asked, "What's your secret, Robert? How did you manage to have kids who were so present?" He laughed his signature laugh and said there was no secret. He said when his kids were little, he worked just enough to cover the bills and spent the rest of his time with them. He said he missed out on promotions because he wouldn't travel. He said he passed on opportunities because he left the office at 6 o'clock sharp every day. He said he earned less money than he could have, but he gained 3 kids who genuinely loved him, 3 kids who wanted to be near him, 3 kids who called because they wanted to, not because they had to. He died surrounded by family, at peace, knowing he'd done the right thing. And me? How will I die? Alone in that huge house, with all the money I've saved and no one who truly cares? No, I won't. Because I still have time. Not much, but I do. And I'm using that time differently now. I call my son every week. I visit him once a month. I go to my grandson's games. I've started to really get to know my daughter-in-law, not just as the woman my son married. I found out she's a literature teacher. I found out she loves to cook. I found out she has an incredible sense of humor. How did I not know this before? My youngest granddaughter is learning to play the piano. I've started going to her lessons to watch. I sit in the back of the room while the teacher instructs. My granddaughter glances back once in a while to see if I'm still there. I'm always there. And at the end of the lesson, she runs over and shows me what she's learned. It's a 15-minute lesson. I take the whole afternoon off to be there because I've finally learned that's what it's all about. It's about being there. But you know what haunts me? You know what keeps me up at night even now? It's thinking about everything I missed, everything I'll never get back. My son took his first steps, and I was in a meeting. He said his first word, and I was on a business trip. First day of school. I don't even remember where I was, but I know I wasn't there. High school graduation, I arrived late. I missed his name being called. College I went. But I spent the whole time on my phone dealing with company issues. His wedding, I paid for it. Paid for everything. The reception, the honeymoon, everything. But I didn't help organize anything. I didn't sit down with him to pick the venue. I didn't go see the banquet hall beforehand. I didn't help with the guest list. I just signed the checks. And I thought I was being a good father because I was paying. On the wedding day, I gave a beautiful speech my secretary had written. Everyone found it moving. My son smiled politely and thanked me, and I didn't even notice that his smile didn't reach his eyes. When my first grandson was born, I was closing a merger. Big company, important deal I couldn't leave. I met the baby 3 days later. 3 days. My son didn't complain. He just said it was fine, that we'd see each other when I could. But I saw it in his eyes. I saw the disappointment. I saw him realizing that nothing had changed, that I was still the same, that work was still more important than family. Do you see the pattern? I was always doing something else, always somewhere else, always with my head somewhere else, and the justification was always the same. I'm doing this for you. I'm working to secure our future. I'm building something to leave for you. A lie. I was building for myself, for my ego, to prove something to myself, to the world, to whoever knows. But it wasn't for my son. If it were for my son, I would have been there with him. And you know the most dangerous lie of all? The lie I believed for decades, and that you probably believe too? That you have time, that you can make up for it later. That when you retire, you'll finally be able to spend time with family. That your kids will understand. That they know you love them even when you're absent. All of those are lies. Comforting lies we tell ourselves so we don't have to face the painful truth. The truth is this. Children don't understand financial sacrifice. They understand presence. They don't want the most expensive toy. They want you to play with them. They don't want the best school. They want you to ask about their day. They don't want expensive vacations. They want you present in the ordinary, boring, repetitive everyday, at breakfast, at dinner, at bedtime, in the little things that seem insignificant but are everything. My son didn't need a room full of toys. He needed someone to play with him. He didn't need the latest video game console. He needed a dad who would play catch with him in the yard. He didn't need a generous allowance. He needed real conversation, someone who cared about what he thought, what he felt, who he was becoming. And I gave him none of that. I gave him money. I gave him things. I didn't give him the one thing that mattered, myself. When he was 12, his mother called me. We'd been divorced for 2 years. She said he was having problems at school. bad grades, poor behavior, isolating himself from his friends, arguing with teachers. I said I'd talk to him over the weekend. I didn't. I was in Chicago closing a deal that weekend. When I got back on Monday, I'd completely forgotten. 3 months later, she called again. She'd taken him to a therapist. The therapist said he was depressed. Depressed? 12 years old and depressed. And you know what I did. I paid for the sessions and kept working. I thought paying for the therapist was my part, my contribution. It never occurred to me to ask why he was depressed. It never occurred to me that maybe I was part of the problem. It never occurred to me to leave work a little earlier and just be with him. Today, 20 years later, I finally asked about that time. We were having coffee, one of those attempts to rebuild what I'd broken. I asked if he remembered going to see the therapist. He did. I asked what you guys talked about. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We talked about you, Dad, about how I felt invisible, about how I thought I'd done something wrong for you not to want to be around me. The therapist was trying to convince me it wasn't my fault, that you were busy, that you loved me in your own way. But I didn't believe him. I figured if you really loved me, you'd be there. That broke me. My son, at 12 years old, thinking it was his fault, thinking he'd done something wrong, thinking he wasn't worthy of his own father's attention, and me, working, saving money, thinking I was doing the right thing. How could I have been so blind? How did I not see? And you? Are you seeing? Or are you so busy, so focused on securing the future, on providing a better life, on working for your kids, that you're not realizing you're losing them right now? Your son is growing up now. Your daughter needs you now, not later, not when you have more time. Now. You think you have time. I thought so too. I figured I'd work another 10 years and then I'd relax. I'd travel with my son. I'd get to know him better. I'd make up for all the lost time. 10 years turned into 20. 20 turned into 30. And when I finally stopped working, when I finally had time, my son was already a grown man I didn't know. A polite stranger who shared my last name but nothing else. If you have young kids, put down that phone right now. Turn off that computer. That meeting can wait. That email can be answered tomorrow. But your child won't be 4 years.